Testing, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to get all these on, Kim. Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Yes. Look at you. I reckon there'll be thousands.
Better? We'll move David across, do you think? Testing.
Yeah, well, he put on there, but he always comments on things like his information is always wrong. It's always wrong. I did actually reply to him once.
So, Scott, you might be better off having it like that. Yeah. Well, sit down and practice. Come on.
Okay. Teach. Mate, here we are. In, just on in. Okay, testing. So I need to be able to and look at my. At the same time. I don't know if that's close enough. Okay, testing. 1, 2, 3. Can everybody hear me? It's almost got to be in my mouth, which is not good. Okay, here am I talking, testing, 1, 2, 3. How are we down there at the back? Can you hear? Can you hear all right? I guess that would sort of... I probably just need it. Yeah, that's the problem. It needs to be a bit longer. Okay, how's that? Councillor Newstead.
They don't want to know us.
Testing. You've got to be pretty close to it. It doesn't really... Because it's sort of... I think that's sort of... Probably better. I've got to slouch to it. A bit closer. Okay. That might be better. Thank you. Testing. Just that this was touching my iPad and was pushing it further away than I was comfortable with. So, okay, we'll work on that. Declare the meeting for Blayney Shire Council Ordinary Meeting open, and thank you all very much for your attendance. In opening this meeting, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, the Wiradjuri people, and pay my respects to their elders, both past, present and emerging. Councillors, now I'd like to refer you to our recording of meeting statement. As you know, this is a very historic meeting today, the first meeting of Blayney Shire Council that's going to be live streamed. So certainly looking forward to that, and I would be encouraging feedback from anybody who has the opportunity to look at the live stream to please feel free to offer any feedback whatsoever so we can approve if we need to. The live streaming of council meetings. In accordance with the Blayney Shire Council Code of Meeting Practice, this meeting will be recorded for the purpose of live streaming function via our YouTube channel. The audio and visual live streaming and recording will allow members of the public to view proceedings via the internet without the need to attend council meetings. The objective of this service is to eliminate geographic and other access barriers for the community wishing to learn more about council's decision-making processes. By speaking at the council meeting, you agree to be live streamed and recorded. Please ensure that if and when you speak at this council meeting that you ensure you are respectful to others and use appropriate language at all times. Whilst council will make every effort to ensure that live streaming is available, it takes no responsibility for and cannot be held liable for technical issues beyond its control. Technical issues may include, but are not limited to, the availability or quality of the internet connection, device failure or malfunction, unavailability of your YouTube or power outages. Live streams and archive recordings are a free public service and are not an official record of council meetings. Recordings will be made of all council meetings, excluding confidential items, and published to YouTube the day after the meeting. For a copy of the official public record, please refer to the council's business papers and minutes page. Council does not accept any responsibility for any verbal comments made during council meetings which may be inaccurate, incorrect, defamatory or contrary to law, and does not warrant nor represent that the material or statements made during the stream meetings are complete, reliable, accurate or free from error. Live streaming is primarily set up to capture the proceedings of the council meetings, and members of the public attending a council meeting need to be aware that they may be recorded as part of the proceedings. Okay, thank you, councillors. Moving on, item 3, apologies for non-attendance. I do believe we do have an apology, but it's already been approved by Councillor Denton. I will now go through to disclosures of interest. Madam GM, do we have any disclosures of interest for the business here this evening?
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes we do. We have 2. I have a declaration of conflict of interest from Councillor Somervale in item number 4 on page 26. The reason for the interest, and it's a pecuniary interest, is that Councillor Somervale is a landholder with 1 kilometre frontage to the Ballabula River downstream of the proposed tailings dam. The EIS discloses a negative impact on water flows in the river, including at my property. I'm therefore personally adversely affected by this development. The second declaration of conflict of interest is from Councillor Reynolds, item number 13, page number 57. The reason for interest, and it's a non-pecuniarily significant interest, is that Councillor Reynolds' wife, Sophie Reynolds, is now on the Millthorpe Markets Organising Committee, and Councillor Reynolds assists on the day of the markets with the cooking of the barbecue. That's all, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Madam GM. Okay, councillors, this evening we have no public forum, or I do not have a mayoral minute, so I'd like to draw your attention now to the minutes. Page 5, item 1, minutes of the previous meeting held 16th of September. Do I have a move that is a true record? Councillor Ewan has moved that way and Councillor Reynolds has seconded that. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Any matters arising, councillors, from those minutes? If not, I refer you now to item 2, page 11, Council Resolution Report. There's a recommendation there, councillors. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Councillor Newstead has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Reynolds, to second that. I'll put that. Any questions, comments? Councillor Somervale.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one comment from me, or a question, in relation to the resolution of the 17th of June 2019, the Centrepoint matter, where we resolved to undertake an operational review of the Centrepoint Sport and Leisure Centre. This, of course, is particularly important given there's a subsidy which is already paid by the rest of the community to keep the Centrepoint facility operating the way it has been. We're spending a lot of money on it. The subsidy is not going to go away. And I think the point has been raised before that it's pretty important, if we're running a business like this, to minimise the subsidy, to make the most of operating the centre, which is why we're undertaking this operational review. So that's a long way to get to my question. Will we be using any outside assistance in relation to the operational review?
Excuse me, sorry, Councillor Somerville, I've been distracted by a microphone here. There we go. Thank you, I can now see you. Please continue. Please continue.
I think I'd finished.
Yep.
My question simply was, I regard this as a really important thing we're doing, because there is a subsidy paid by the rest of the community to keep Centrepoint operating as it has been. The subsidy may well become even greater once we've finished all the work we're doing. It's therefore important to, in a business like this, to operate it as efficiently as we can, maximise the revenue so we minimise the subsidy, and we're doing this review. My question was, will we be getting any outside assistance in relation to the review?
Thank you, Councillor Somerville. I may ask the Director to reply to that question.
Mr. Mayor, Councillor Somerville, approximately 1 month ago we did seek some interest from external consultancies as to ballpark prices for supply of services which would go towards the operational review. We did receive 3 or 4 back to ascertain where we sat from a procurement purpose. Whilst I haven't formally discussed it with the General Manager, we've had informal discussions which we were probably likely not to go with external consultancies, but run the operational review through a panel of key council staff across a number of fields to undertake that review.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Thank you, Councillor Somerville. Councillors. Councillor Reynolds.
Mr. Mayor, a couple of questions. Firstly, the King George Oval bore and the application, which was from the February council meeting of this year. Given the dry season and pretty well urgency, is there any way that we can expedite or approach the department again about trying to get a licence for this bore so that we don't draw on Central Tableland's water supplies as much as we are?
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Mr. Director, would you like to comment in regards to the bore licence?
For you, Mr. Mayor, I'll have to take that one on notice for Councillor Reynolds.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments, councillors, regards to this report? Councillor Reynolds.
Next question, Mr. Mayor, is with regard to the Blayney solar farm that we've resolved to make a decision by the 31st of December. Has there been any further communication from this organisation with regard to the operation of that solar farm?
Madam GM, have any? Mr. Director.
Through Mr. Mayor, Council has received correspondence from the lessee. However, there's been no confirmation of the commencement date, but my understanding is that they are going to plan, so they'll definitely be making a determination by that date.
Councillor Reynolds.
And my final question, which comes from Millthorpe, with regard to the electric vehicle charging station, any update on progress in negotiations with the various rail authorities with regard to the charging station in Millthorpe?
Any updates in regards to the charging station? Madam General Manager.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we've had advice from Sydney Trains where I'll take that on notice and give you an update.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments in regards to this item? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Moving through now to item 3, page 19, Risk, Work, Health and Safety Quarterly Report. There's a recommendation there, councillors. Do I have a mover for this? Councillor Reynolds has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ewan has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments in regards to this report? Councillor Reynolds?
Mr Mayor, I'd like to commend Vicky for this report. It's quite an extensive report and a major upgrade on previous reports. It provides a lot more information which was requested by councillors.
Yes, it is.
So may I commend the staff member for a much more comprehensive report, and no questions about that report.
Certainly agree with those comments, Councillor Reynolds. Any other questions or comments, councillors? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Item 4, page 23, Flyers Creek Wind Farm Voluntary Planning Agreement. Recommendation there, councillors. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Councillor Newstead has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Somervale has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments in regards to this item? Councillor Reynolds?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a couple of quick comments with regard to Yarrawambang Road. I noticed in the report that it says it's been upgraded, but it has only been upgraded to the Penuara Road intersection, and above that intersection there is some major deterioration in some sections. So one would hope that some of these funds, once this project is up and running or construction starts and the VPA money is made available, that road can get some TLC in some sections of it as part of that funding.
Yes, absolutely, Councillor Reynolds. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Somervale, the floor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a couple of comments. The report mentions that maybe in relation to the funding provided for community benefits, that one channel for using that funding may well be through the Financial Assistance Committee. I think that's a good idea. We've got a pretty streamlined system set up now with a committee that meets and allocates funds for community projects. I can't see any reason why some of that funding can't be channeled through that, maybe with a infidel representative on the committee as well. So I think that's a good idea. And my second question is really this. I assume that we don't need any amendment to the voluntary planning agreement. In other words, it's taken a long while to get to the stage they finally got to. They've changed the land they're operating under. They've had, I don't know how many modifications to their approval, but the VPA is still good, I assume.
That is correct. It's pretty much the original one that was negotiated. Mr Director, would you like to comment?
Yeah, Mr Mayor, that is correct. So we've been liaising with them and they've also on a couple of questions we had, but
Credit to the original agreement.
Yes, it is. Any other questions? Councillor Reynolds have questions.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Probably a question to Councillor Somervale with regard to the community grants. Would you potentially be looking at bigger grants or bigger lump sums for bigger projects, you know, $10,000 or $15,000 projects, rather than having the cap that you currently had?
Well, we have thought
Councillor
about
Somervale.
that. We have thought about that in a different context, and I think the opportunity to review the program, review the way funding is allocated, particularly as in the last 12 months or so, we have had really good community projects which have exceeded our 3,000 or our 10,000 cap for special projects. With a bit more funding in there, it may well be that we can have a small category for a larger grants, and this might enable us to do that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Somervale, and obviously something to talk about and plan for next year. Councillors, any other questions or comments in regards to this item? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Councillors, moving through now to item 5, page 26, McPhillamys Gold Project, EIS. Recommendation there. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Or Councillor Somervale has declared a interest in this, a pecuniary interest, please. Let the minutes reflect that Councillor Somervale has declared an interest in this item and is leaving the chamber. Now refer you back to item 5, page 26. Councillors, do I have a mover for this recommendation? Thank you, Councillor King. Councillor Ewan has seconded. Any questions or comments, councillors, in regards to this item? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and appreciate that the staff's time and resources that have already been put into compiling a report on this project. It is a very significant project for the community, and it's important in the report that we put in as a comment that we both highlight the positives of this project, and there are several positives, but also the negatives of this project, and particularly the impact on the Kings Plains community. It needs to be noted that that community and those residents that are potentially close to that mine are potentially hurting. Some of them are hurting quite severely even at the moment, and one of the challenges is that it could be another 2 years or up to another 2 years before a decision is made. So any assistance that can be provided to that community in the intervening period of time would also be welcome. But it is important to highlight both those positives and the negatives for this project. And I think the staff, in what they've outlined in this report and what they're working on for the final report, are taking both sides into account.
Right, thank you, Councillor Reynolds. I certainly agree with those comments. Councillors, Councillor Kingham.
I think it's important that the councillors recognise the concerns of the Blayney Headwaters group, and I think we all share those concerns in relation to water quality, dust, noise, traffic, and all those need to be addressed adequately, and I'm sure we all share those concerns. I'm more concerned with where it's going to end up, and I wrote to the General Manager about this because my experience is giving approval to Cadia to start, or Newcrest to start their mine, 12 years operation and a water supply eventually for Orange. And when you look at the site today, there's more than 12 years left and there's no water supply for Orange. So we need to be thinking of where this could end up once approval's given. Like, it could be a mine on the other side of the highway, it could be a mine at Mandurama, and I think we need to be very careful that we address where this might end up if approval's given, and we need to keep a very close brief on that particular aspect, because once approval's given, then it's very hard to not accept any other variation. So that's my concern, the long range, not thinking so much of a year out, but thinking of 20 years away.
Thank you, Councillor Kingham, but it is important we have this comprehensive EIS in front of us right now, and certainly that's what we need to concern ourselves with and comment on, what we have in front of us. Councillors, any other questions or comments? Councillor Ewan?
Yeah, Mr Mayor, I support what our in the sense that we as a council do need to put our submission in, which does show here in dot point, of course, which will be expanded on prior to the 24th of submitment, the benefits and the negatives for the project, and I guess then of course we rely on the due diligence of the process over the next 12 to 18, maybe 2 years to come up with what will be the correct answer for the project, I guess. It is a great project, and I believe that we as a community will be able to, should this be granted approval, we as a council will be given the right to manage it on behalf of the Shire residents, and I'm sure we can do that. The process is a very thorough one, so I have confidence that the process will deliver the right answer for the Shire and the community as in the wider community. So I'd like to thank the staff at this point in time for the detail which they've highlighted we will put in, and I believe that we've covered pretty much all the aspects from our council point of view. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ewan. Councillors, any other questions or comments in relation to this item? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declared carried. Invite Councillor Somervale to re-enter the chamber. Thank you. Okay, thank you, councillors. Now I'd like to draw your attention to item 6, page 28, Destination Management Plan 2019-2023. Recommendation there. Do I have Councillor Reynolds has moved that way? Do I have a seconder? Councillor Somervale has seconded this motion. Questions or comments, councillors? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to again congratulate Megan and her role in constructing this destination management plan for the community, and to highlight that it's an important part of this plan is actually working with Orange 360 and our neighbouring councils, particularly Cabonne. And one part of that is the new town and villages visitor guide, which will be available for both the Cabonne and Blayney villages, but it'll be one guide. So around Orange, people will have a guide that can take them from Canoundra through to Mandurama or Lyndhurst, Mandurama, etc., and back up through to Orange through a trip through our villages, or vice versa around through the Cabonne villages. So an important part of working with Orange 360 and some important outcomes that are coming out of our linkage with Orange 360 in developing that and in a collaborative way.
Thank you very much, Councillor Reynolds. Councillor Somervale.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As the council delegate to the board of Orange 360, I should mention that the directors and a few general managers of the 3 constituent councils had a strategic planning day approximately a month ago, a facilitated session, and it was very constructive. The outcome of that is that the organisation gets through a lot of work with very limited staff, and I think the thing that's holding back the organisation at the moment is probably the staffing levels. And I think whilst membership, there's a target of 300 members for the end of this year, and it's comfortably in excess of 200 at the moment, the original intention that councils would help set this up and support it until it got on its feet and it would ultimately be a self-sustaining industry body. I don't know that's going to happen in the short term, and I just wanted to mention to councillors now that when our current 3-year funding is up, which is at the end of this year, I think the request will come from Orange 360 to renew that funding. I don't know for how long or for how much, but I suspect that's something we'll be looking at later in this financial year.
Thank you very much, Councillor Somervale, and certainly I'd just like to reflect the comments of the previous 2 councillors. It has been extremely successful to date, the engagement with Orange 360. It's really value-adding what we do here on the ground with our staff and our initiatives, and to see our report and our plan link so closely with Orange 360 is really important, as Councillor Reynolds has mentioned earlier. So we'll look forward to that opportunity to revisit our support for Orange 360. Councillors, any other questions or comments? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Okay, councillors, now through to item 7, page 31, report of council investments as at 30th September. There's recommendations there 1 and 2. Do I have a mover? Councillor Kingham has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Newstead has seconded that. Any questions or comments regards to this item, councillors? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question is in relation to the amount of holdings that we have in triple B plus to B category investments at the moment. Our policy says we are to only have a maximum of 40% from the way I understand it, yet in this figure here it says we're holding 58% of our investments in triple B plus to B category investments. So is that the case? Have I misinterpreted anything? And if it's not the case, then why are we holding so much against our current council policy?
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. I believe there's some change in that regard. Mr Director.
Through Mr Mayor, as indicated in the report, there's been a downgrading of the rating for AMP, that it's resulted to drop to that triple B rating, and as a consequence we've exceeded the policy maximum for AMP individually as well as for that overall category. So upon maturity we'll seek to rectify that.
Thank you, Mr Director. Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillor Somervale.
Yeah, Councillor Reynolds raises a point which I guess I was going to mention too. I'm disappointed that we had so much in AMP. Councillors might remember I commented probably 6 months ago, or maybe longer, that given the position that AMP was in after the Royal Commission, there was bound to be some sort of restructuring taking place, and it wasn't a good spot to have our money. So it certainly fitted within our policy at the time, and that's fine. But we now, it's now happened as I thought it would, and we're going to have to move the money out of AMP. Not that I don't want to suggest there's anything at risk in terms of our investments there at all, but I think it was inevitable this was going to happen.
That's correct. Thank you, Councillor Somervale. And the opportunity to do it now as they mature is now. Councillors, any other questions or comments? Councillor Kingham, thank you.
My question relates to the certification 625 of the Local Government Act. This report highlights the investments, but there is another side, and that's the debits or the loans. Why do we not have a view on a monthly basis of our loans and the quantity of it and at what interest rate they are? Like, it's only half the story. So is there some requirement, is there no requirement under S625 of the Local Government Act to do that? Or do we just have to wait for the quarterly statements to understand that? But to me, it's only half the picture.
Well, I certainly believe, I don't think it is a requirement, but as you say, we do have it in our quarterly reviews, but I'm sure there's a requirement to have it every monthly. If there was, we would have it, I would imagine, Mr. Director.
Through Mr. Mayor, there's no statutory requirement to furnish that information on a monthly basis, unlike with investments. However, should council require a monthly report, we can certainly provide that, but as you touch on, we do report quarterly to council on our loan holdings and that information you'd requested.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Certainly a conversation worth continuing to have, Councillor Kingham. Any other questions or comments, councillors, regards to this report? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Councillors, item 8, page 36, the adoption of the investment policy. Recommendation there. Do I have a mover for this recommendation?
I'll move that.
Councillor Newstead has like to move that way, and Councillor Reynolds, I believe, has seconded that. Thank you. Any questions or comments regards to this policy? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A follow-on from my previous questions then. If we were to adopt this policy, when do we actually need to make sure, given T Corp has told us guidelines for a loan, that we're not allowed to have more than, I think it's 30% in total of the B grade investments, if I can find the page, triple B to plus to B category, and that the AMP investments, most of them don't come due till next year, so we're several months away. If we adopt this policy, does that mean that we immediately have to move in to realign and so break those term deposits? Could I have some clarification there on where we stand if we do adopt this policy tonight?
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Mr. Director.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'd have to take the question on notice insofar as the time frame, if there is a time frame at all, but my understanding is that we just need to progress towards, following council's adoption, we progress towards adhering to that policy requirement. I'll take the question on notice and provide a formal response to council.
I would imagine it'd be appropriate to change when they mature, as opposed to breaking that arrangement. If T Corp aren't saying we need to get out of it instantly, well, that's probably appropriate thing to do, but would certainly appreciate a bit more information around that. Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Any other questions? Councillor Somervale.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Maybe this is something that the Director could take on notice. The Ministerial Investment Order, I meant to look that up, but I didn't. My understanding was that the requirements of T Corp in relation to the amount of investments in triple B rated securities were tighter than the Ministerial Investment Order would permit us to do. In other words, they were going further than, in fact, the minister says we can, making it even more restrictive. I'm not sure whether that's right or not, but if it is right, then I think the first paragraph under 1.5 of the policy might need to be tweaked a bit, because that suggests that we can invest in those allowed under the ministerial investment order. I'd like to take that on notice.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Somerville. Thank you, Mr Director. Councillors, any other questions or comments? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Move now through to item 9, page 45, Code of Conduct Complaints for period ending 31st of August 2019. Recommendation there, councillors. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Councillor Ewan has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Newstead has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments? It's statutory reporting. Questions or comments? I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Move now through to page 47, item 10, disclosures by councillors and designated persons. Recommendation there that these disclosures be received. Do I have a mover? Councillor Reynolds has moved that way and Councillor Ewan has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments regards to this? No. If not, I will put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declared carried. Item 11, page 49, Director of Infrastructure Services Monthly Report. Recommendation there, councillors, to have a mover. This report be received and noted. Councillor Reynolds has moved that way and Councillor Ewan, I believe, has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments in regards to this report? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. A couple of quick questions, or hopefully quick, and they may need to be taken on notice. Now, with the wastewater strategic business plan, I know we did a couple of workshops on this over the last number of months with regard to, and particularly coming up with the, I think it was the connection fee of the cost between Millthorpe and Blayney, and the big differential in the two. And wondering whether we as a council can still change that fee, even if we don't actually endorse the strategic business plan at this stage, and by the looks of it, it's going to be a couple of years until we do something along the appropriate lines with the water management.
Yeah, look, you're right there, Councillor Reynolds. It is going to take a bit longer than we thought because of this extra strategies and planning we have to do. I would imagine if we wanted to modify the developer contribution plan, that would be a great conversation at budget time next year. It would be the appropriate time to do that. As Mr Director would like to comment in regards to what's happening with our integrated water cycle management plan strategy.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the DSP and the SBP we did workshop concurrently. They both go through separate channels once we've done that, and at the moment the DSP is the one that is awaiting the audit process through state. The strategic business plan is the one that we've been looking to try and work with the government on to get funding to do that. It's now been caught up in the integrated water cycle management requirements, which the state has changed its funding requirements with regards to the Safe and Secure funding program. So the ability to get funding for the works that we had identified in the strategic business plan now get tangled up in the integrated water cycle management plan, which we now have to review. So, and that will take years.
Thank you, Mr Director. Councillor Reynolds, further question?
To the Director, so does this also involve then Central Tablelands Water? Will we have to develop the plan with Central Tablelands Water, given that they're a separate entity?
For you, Mr Mayor,
Director.
I would expect so.
Important role. I'm sure Councillor Somerville, as Chair of CTW, would like to comment on that.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I think because this council is not responsible for the whole of the water cycle, the integrated water cycle management plan in the past has been a joint exercise with Central Tablelands Water and Cabon and Wedden and Blayney, where fresh water compared is dealt with in the same plan, but provided by different entities. I would mention in relation to that I'm pretty familiar with the changes to the requirements for the Safe and Secure program and the requirement that before anything will qualify under that, under the sort of version 3 of the rules around the Safe and Secure Water program, that councils have to review their integrated water cycle management plan. Now, I do know, though, that the Central New South Wales JO has had a lot of discussions with Department of Planning and Environment in relation to the possibility of councils in the Central West doing some sort of joint integrated water cycle management plan as part of a regional town water strategy. There may be something that's, that needs to be watched there as to whether the funding will be available through the advocacy of the joint organisation.
Excellent, thank you very much. Very comprehensive answer, Councillor Somerville. Councillors, any other questions or comments in regards to the Director's report? Councillor Kingham.
Yeah, I have two issues. Firstly, the major contract on page 51, the Carcoar Road Bridge. I'd like the council at its next workshop to consider a program of opening and dedication of the road and the bridge. I think it's a major win for the council, for ratepayers, and I'd like some significant event to take place when the bridge is open, maybe early in the new year, but we need a workshop to consider what form that will take. My other question relates to the stormwater at the culverts. There's been a culvert inspection, but I'm presuming that that's underneath. The problem I have is that so many of the culverts have a rough surface. And I've discussed this with the Director once before, but there does need to be a program of improving the road surface above the culverts. There's so many of them that are roughed across. We need to consider in the future. I'm not talking about immediately, but I think we need to consider not only does the water go through the culvert, but does the traffic impact on that culvert, because every bump, it's deeper once the trucks in particular hit it. And I've never heard of any program where we've considered the pavement above the culverts, and I think we should next year consider the pavement above the culverts.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kingham. Councillor Reynolds.
A question to the Director. With regard, it's not in the report here, but I noticed on Bruce Kingham's property, there are two very large pipes that have been sitting there since we, as council, did the Calrigger Creek bridge on Forest Reefs Road. Are they council's pipes or do they belong to someone else? And if they are council's pipes, are we looking at relocating them, given that they have been there for several years since that bridge was opened?
Mr. Director.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm certainly aware of those same pipes. I will need to take it on notice, but I am pretty confident that a negotiation was made with the previous landowner of that land who asked for them, and we had no use for them.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Councillor Somerville.
Mr. Mayor, I'll comment first. I think this report's fantastic, and all credit to the Director for keeping us informed of what's going on in his area on a monthly basis. My question relates to the comment regarding assets on page 51, where the Director says that we are reviewing the, is this the comment? Yes, transport asset revaluations for 2020. My comment is, will that asset revaluation include an assessment of the remaining useful life of those transportation assets?
Question, Mr. Director.
I would expect there would be a quite complicated response to that, so it'd be best to take that one on notice.
Thank you, Mr. Director. My interest in this, of course, is remaining useful life feeds into depreciation, and We've taken a lot of hits on depreciation, and I'd like to see us making sure that where we can extend the useful life of assets that we're spending a lot of money on, we do extend the useful life of those assets to what is realistic, so that we minimise our depreciation on those assets in our annual accounts.
Thank you very much, Somervale. Certainly appreciation is our favourite word at the moment. Councillors, any other questions or comments? I'd just like to note in regards to the first item in the Director's report about the Inland Rail Opportunities session, and draw your attention to those dot points to how positive the region is, and the future looks quite exciting with those statistics and figures in regards to employment and youth returning back to our region, and hoping that the Inland Rail can continue to drive that sort of investment and growth, not only for the areas that it directly impacts, but certainly for those areas surrounding the Inland Rail. So I'd like to thank the Director for attending that meeting, and indeed putting this report together to keep us up to date about what's going on at that higher level outside our region. Okay, councillors, any other questions or comments in regards to this item? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour? Aye. Against? Declared carried. Councillors, page 54, item 12, road funding allocations, recommendation there. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Mover, anybody? Like to? Councillor Ewan has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Somervale has seconded that. Thank you. Questions or comments regards to this item? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've got a question to the Director with regard to Penuara Road. The sealing or resealing takes place from 5.9 kilometres from Yarrawonbang Road to 4 Mile Creek Road, yet the heavy patching also takes place from 5.9 kilometres from Yarrawonbang Road to 7.5 kilometres from Yarrawonbang Road. So my question is this an error? Because I would find it very surprising that you're going to reseal a road you're about to heavy patch. And is it an error in that it's just the wrong place, or have we overestimated the area that we're going to do heavy patching on or resealing on? Probably resealing on more than heavy patching, one would assume.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Question, Mr Director.
Looking at the tables there, Councillor, there is obviously a section which requires heavy patching, but the considerable length actually requires a reseal. So where we've got to do heavy patching, obviously we need to put a new seal on top of it.
So it's part of the work, all up, the resealing and the heavy patching. Okay, thank you. Councillor Reynolds.
Probably a supplementary then, because my understanding was when we normally did heavy patching that was part of the cost of the 150,000. So if the Director could take it on notice just to double check that we're not doubling up, or whether the areas that we're doing are slightly different, and come back to us on just whether that is, because the rest of the roads aren't mentioned in the sealing, but they're being mentioned in the heavy patching. So, but anyway, if the Director could take that on notice and come back to councillors, it'd be appreciated.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, any other questions or comments regards to this item? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour? Aye. Against? Declared carried. Moving now through, councillors, item 13, page 57, minutes of the Traffic Committee meeting held 11th of October. Councillor Reynolds has declared an interest in this item and is leaving the chamber. Councillors, recommendations there 1 through to 6. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Councillor Newstead has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Somervale has seconded. Councillors, any questions or comments on what is a very busy Traffic Committee by the look of all these issues? Questions or comments? Pretty straightforward. Looks pretty good. A lot of events coming up at the end of the year. It's quite exciting. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Aye. Against? Declared carried. Could I please invite Councillor Reynolds back into the chamber? Thank you, councillors. Now draw your attention to item 14, page 61, the draft local strategic planning statement. There's a recommendation there that we put this statement out for public exhibition. We have 1, 2 and 3 recommendations there. Do I have a mover for these 3 recommendations? Councillor Somervale has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ewan has seconded that. Any questions or comments regards to this item, Councillor Reynolds?
Mr Mayor, I do have a few concerns that I did bring up in a workshop 2.5 weeks ago, particularly about the figures that are in for our villages, the populations that are in there. They're very inaccurate, and did ask for changes to be made in that workshop, and also the rural residential community, and particularly areas like Forest Reefs that have more than 500 residents. I think it's about 509 residents according to the ABS, but some form of acknowledgement of particularly the rural residential areas being included. So I do have some concerns that we're putting a document that possibly has a number of inaccuracies out on public display, and would potentially ask that it be withdrawn and amended, modified, and then we'll deal with it next month, rather than putting a document that has a fair number of errors in it out of consultation.
Mr Director, do you believe there's a fair number of errors in this document?
Mr Mayor, noting that I wasn't at the workshop and don't know the questions exactly that Councillor Reynolds is referring to my knowledge, all of the information that has been utilised in terms of data is taken directly from the residential or the Blayney settlement strategy review. So to my knowledge, it's extremely accurate. I can take it offline and take specifics, but...
Councillor Reynolds, why do you think there's some inaccuracies? This is straight off the fresh Blayney settlement strategy work. You seem to think that the numbers aren't right?
You have, I think it's Mandurama at 490 people, and Millthorpe at about 700 people, that there are some fairly substantial population inaccuracies, but I think it was more important that we acknowledged particularly the rural residential community in this plan, and it hasn't been acknowledged at this point in time. So I could go around it and just put in a submission, I suppose, as a councillor, but I was hoping that we would have actually progressed it a bit before this plan came to council.
Well, I certainly appreciate your comments in regards to this. I guess I'd be quite happy to, while acknowledging your comments, to put it out to draft exhibition and then have a chance to actually engage not only the public submissions, but as you say, yourself, and give us a chance to actually look at it while it's on 28 days. Like all these things, we're getting close to Christmas. It'd be nice to have it out there. I believe our settlement strategy is getting very close to being looked at as well, or workshopped by council before it goes out to draft. So it could be a good opportunity to actually look at both those strategies together during this exhibition period. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Somervale?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Only to support what Councillor Reynolds says. We did talk about this, and it does seem strange that we've taken the ABS figures for places like Barry, which according to the ABS is a big region. They've got 247 people in Barry, and you compare that to Carcoar, where there's 185 people. Now, if you go to Carcoar and you go to Barry, I swear there's more people in Carcoar than there is in Barry. And the same thing applies all through this. We've taken the ABS figures, which is fine, because we don't have to count the people ourselves. But what we're talking about here is the size of our villages. We're not talking about the size of the peri-urban region around the villages. So probably for this particular purpose, it'd be good to be able to come up with a figure for the size of our villages to compare them like for like. So, as usual, I'm supporting Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you. So I guess what I'm looking for here is some direction from councillors. I mean, I'm suggesting that, okay, if there's 2 or 3 inaccurate, I mean, it's quite a comprehensive document. What we've identified is a couple of potentially under-reporting of population figures. Is there anything else, though, that probably should stop this from going out to public comment in the next 28 days. It's just a question of re-looking at those numbers potentially during the exhibition period. Is there anything else more dramatic than that we need to take it off the table?
I'll go first here. I don't think I'd take it off exhibition. I mean, it's a comment that's been made. We may well get feedback from the community during the course of the exhibition that those numbers look a bit dodgy, and we can fix those up when we finally adopt it. So I don't, from my point of view, it's not something that I would hold up putting it on exhibition for.
Thank you, Councillor Somerville. So, councillors, any other questions or comments? We do have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. I think we've had we obviously need, during this 28-day public exhibition period, if this motion is successful, is a chance to look at some of those numbers. Any other questions or comments? I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Thank you, councillors. Item 15, page 64, the draft community participation plan. Recommendations there 1, 2 and 3. Do I have a mover for these? Councillor Reynolds has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Newstead has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments regards to this plan? We have a plan for a plan, and this is what we're doing. Pretty important though, how we communicate and engage the community. Councillor Reynolds.
Just going to endorse, Mr Mayor, what you've said, that it is a plan for all of our plans. So, but a requirement of government to have this overarching plan.
That is correct, Councillor Reynolds. So, councillors, any other questions or comments? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Councillors, page 66, item 16, erection of a dwelling, 2624 Hobbys Road. Barry's recommendation there. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Councillor Newstead has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Somerville is happy to second that. Councillors, any questions or comments in regards to this? I will be calling the division after the vote. No questions or comments, pretty straightforward, pretty comprehensive report. Thank you very much for the staff. No questions or comments. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. As a division, I declared that unanimous. Okay, thank you, councillors. Now moving through to page 86, item 17, erection of a shed, 3 Mandurama Street, Neville. There's recommendation there, councillors. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Councillor Reynolds has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Somerville has seconded that. Councillors, again, a pretty comprehensive report. Any questions or comments in regards to this? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. One does wonder whether we might need to, and maybe a period of time, to tweak the DCP to allow slightly larger sheds. This is an item that has come up a couple of times in council since the new DCP has been issued, so something that we may need to take on board and maybe consider.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Questions or comments? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. And I will call for a division, and I believe that the motion was unanimous. Thank you. I declare that motion has been unanimous. Okay, councillors, we now move through. We have a closed committee report. Item 18, page 99, and there's provision of traffic control services. This matter is considered to be confidential under section 10A2 of the Local Government Act, as it deals with commercial information of a confidential nature that would, if disclosed, confer a commercial advantage on a competitor or council. We have a mover that we go into closed committee. Has moved that way, and Councillor Reynolds has seconded that. I'll put that. All in favour? Against? Declared carried. We now go into closed committee. hopefully we haven't lost too many people while we've been in closed committee. We are now in open council, back open to the public. We have a decision on the closed item, and that was the recommendation which has been approved, was that council accept the tender from Midwest Traffic Management for the quality assured schedule of rates contract for the provision of traffic control services. Councillors, that brings us to the end of our meeting, our first live streamed meeting. I thank you all very much for your attendance, and I declare the meeting closed.